DACs. Which one do you choose? Cheap or expensive, big or small? Which Chinese brand should you go with? The newest DAC is obviously the best DAC, right? Or is it the one with the greatest number of DAC chips shoehorned inside? Or maybe it's the one that measures the best? Over the last 2 years, I have grown more and more wary of DACs. There are so many of them, released so often and come with so much hype with every iteration and reiteration, that I feel it's a never-ending cycle. Like Groundhog Day. Topping, as you know, is one of a few manufacturers that consistently releases new gear, basically on a monthly basis. Some of their stuff is fairly affordable. Apos Audio asked if I would review the new Topping D90se. I can't pass up the chance to test something like that. So Apos sent me a loaner unit. By the way, if you are not aware, Apos Audio and I have a continuing relationship where they send me gear from time to time so that I can review and return it to them. Apos sells all types of hi-fi gear and is an authorized reseller for everything they carry. They've got excellent customer service and a wide selection of products. Take a look at their website if you've got the itch to spend some money. Anyway, the D90se is $899. What can this expensive DAC offer to the community? Let's not mince words. The D90se is nearly $1,000 when you factor taxes and shipping, so that's how I'm going to refer to this DAC, as a $1,000 piece of kit. I want you all to keep that in mind as we progress through this review. The D90se is, obviously, the second iteration of the original product. This is a standalone DAC. The D90se comes with the ES9038 Pro DAC chip. This is the same DAC used in several other products, including the SMSL M500, SMSL SU9, Sabage D5, and the Topping DX7. You can find many other implementations of this chip when you go and browse AliExpress. Topping claims that their implementation of the 9038 Pro arranges each audio channel in parallel by 4 conventional balanced channels. They say, quote, "This makes the performance of the D90se even better," end quote. They further say that the 9038 Pro's 8 total channels are connected in parallel, which produces, quote, "the real 4 DAC parallel connection in terms of sound effects and technology," end quote. Topping promises that this DAC will plunge you into the ultimate high-res experience. They guarantee bit-perfect audio. Unfortunately, Topping does not provide concrete explanations of what we should hear as a result of all the channels they've included in this DAC. They merely claim that this implementation makes the D90se even better. Better than what? Here's the breakdown of features. The D90se supports all forms of PCM and DSD up to 1024. It's a full MQA-compliant DAC. It has Bluetooth reception with support for AAC, SBC, all forms of aptX, and of course, LDAC. The D90se supports Bluetooth reception only. The DAC has a variable voltage output. It has the typical DAC digital filters. The D90se promises to connect to all types of hi-fi gear as it has 6 input options. Topping's marketing boasts that due to the low THD, quote, "clearer details are at your fingertips," end quote. This blurb needs immediate debunking. This is false, misleading, and outright disingenuous marketing by Topping. It is a physiological fact that humans cannot hear THD below 1%, and it is physically impossible to hear any alteration between THD measurements far below 1%. In Topping's case, they want you to believe that you will hear more clear details than ever before because of the D90se's 0.0005% THD. That, to me, seems to be a misleading statement unless you compare this DAC to another which has measured THD of 1% or higher. Apos Audio has a comparison chart for the D90 and D90se. You can see that when you compare the MQA version of the original D90, there are only a few differences. First, the original D90 came with the AK4499 EQ DAC, but since AKM's factory burned down last year, Sabre has basically taken over the bulk of DAC duties. Second, the original D90 supported only aptX HD and LDAC Bluetooth codecs. Third, the original D90 did not support DSD 1024. Of course, there are some differences in dynamic range, THD, and SNR, all of which are completely meaningless since they have no actual application to human auditory perception. After all, when companies and some reviewers boast of dynamic range, they leave out the physiological problem that people cannot listen to sounds above 90 decibels without incurring hearing damage. Moreover, the measured THD and SNR is pointless since you literally cannot hear these subatomic level differences, a fact that members at ASR will apparently concede when directly asked. Fundamentally, the differences between the D90 and the D90se are Bluetooth codecs, which may be relevant to some, higher DSD support, which might be relevant to an incredibly small number of audiophiles, and the switch from AKM to Sabre DACs, which basically came out of necessity due to AKM's fire. Of course, Topping says you need to pair the D90se with the A90 amplifier for the best results. I'm not convinced this is a necessary step. Topping does not offer any explanation why this pairing is the best. Look, Topping and SMSL usually make sturdy products. They don't use much plastic in the construction, try to keep things simple, minimalist even, and they do tend to include the necessary accessories in the box, all the cables that you actually need, and usually a standard remote. The same is true for the D90se. This is a solid piece of metal. It's heavy enough to sit on your desk without moving around when you push on its buttons. The front panel has a large monochrome screen flanked by power and selection buttons. The rear panel has a plethora of connection options. You get RCA, XLR, optical, coaxial, USB, I2S, and AES. The D90se comes with a USB and power cable. Neither is special, and you can probably bet both are generic. While the D90se is sturdy and probably looks handsome to many, I seriously question Topping's decision about the remote. This, I admit, is a little nitpicky, but at this price bracket, I will criticize the remote nonetheless. The remote for this $1,000 DAC is the standard plastic remote they bundle with far cheaper products. Frankly, it's a little bit disappointing when you pay this much money and get such basic accessories. Ultimately, the D90se has excellent build. I cannot find a fault with its construction. But I'm a little perplexed why Topping could not put in a little bit extra effort to include more robust remotes matched to their top-of-the-line DAC. If you read reviews of the D90se, you'll find lots of praise. You will even find some people claiming that the D90se is as good or better than DACs costing several thousands of dollars. I am not a proponent of pricey DACs. I need to know what the extra cost actually gives me and whether there is enough difference in sound to justify the price tag. We have, of course, seen many DACs from Topping and SMSL. Rarely, if ever, do they explain the tuning of their products. Should we expect neutral, analytical, or warm? While a lot of marketing is spent touting measurements, you'd be hard-pressed to find even an iota of mention regarding sound signature. My primary concern is getting past the measurements and talking about things that actually do matter. In the D90se's case, I want to know its sound signature, how it compares to other products, and what its overall performance is. That is, how usable are its features. Topping seems to claim some sort of special implementation of the 9038 Pro in their DAC. The D90se's additional channels in parallel is impressive marketing. However, it's unfortunate Topping does not explain what those extra channels are supposed to do. This somewhat limits differences I should be listening for in an A-B comparison. Speaking of comparisons, I do not have the original D90, but I do have an alternative product that uses the same 9038 Pro DAC. It's the Sauvage D5, a product that was released sometime in 2019. The D5 will be our head-to-head ES9038 Pro competitor. This should be a good test to determine if the additional channels in the D90se make an audible difference. To test the D90se, I set specific testing parameters. First, I listened to the D90se using the Rupert Neve headphone amplifier. This amp, though expensive and very short on features, is a neutral amp designed specifically for professional application. It has 3 input options, all of which can be selected on the fly. I connected to the D90se with the RNHP through RCA and XLR simultaneously. The D90se can send signal out of both at once. I did this because I wanted to test if I could hear any difference in noise or distortion between the two types of connections. I repeated this connection test on the Drop 789. Do you remember that amp? It was all the rage and hype for years. Because the 789 has both single-ended and balanced connections, I was able to listen for any change in separation or sound quality between balanced and unbalanced connections. The second test was comparing the D90se to a few alternative DACs. This includes the Soncause LA-QXD1 and the Topping EX5. For this test, I connected the D90se and one of these comparison products to the same PC. I used Voicemeeter Banana to send audio signal to both DACs at once. I then connected both DACs to the RNHP and 789 via a passive RCA switchbox. Finally, the last test was between the D90se and the Sauvage D5. I connected both DAC outputs through a passive RCA switchbox to the RNHP and also to the 789. For all of these tests, I used my Avantone Planar, Allo Audio S4X, Focal Stelia, Sennheiser HD800S, and audeze LCD4Z. I used both single-ended and balanced connections off and on to try to get a fair impression. Let's cut to the chase. What are my findings? Let's first discuss the XLR and RCA on the D90se. As it turned out, when I tested the D90se's XLR and RCA outputs, I could not hear a difference whatsoever in sound quality. I have said this over and over again, but the bottom line is that XLR output does not have a different sound signature than the RCA from the same device. More to the point, I could not hear any difference in noise or distortion between RCA and XLR connection. The D90se had no audible difference whatsoever in regards to noise or distortion when compared against the D5, the EX5, and the Soncause. All of these products produce distortion and noise that is far, far below anything you could ever hear. You should not feel compelled to use any modern DAC through a balanced connection. That is true for the D90se as much as it is true for any other DAC I've tested in the last 3 years. I repeated the XLR versus RCA test on the 789 and got exactly the same experience as I had on the RNHP. The only difference these connections provide is power output. Switching from balanced to single-ended required changing volume to match, and that's it. The balanced connection did not provide a different sound signature than single-ended connection. The balanced connection did not render more separation or clarity. This was a consistent finding during my 1-month test of the D90se. In other words, when you account for the volume jump after you switch from single-ended to balanced, there's no obvious difference in sound signature or presentation. I admit, I was expecting the balanced output to provide audible differences in separation of instruments and vocals, or greater clarity, similar to what I experienced on the Topping D30 Pro when I reviewed that DAC. But that was not the experience on the D90se. Using the Avantone Planar, Sennheiser HD800S, Focal Stelia, and audeze LCD4Z, balanced and unbalanced, I never heard anything obviously different in clarity or separation when comparing balanced to single-ended. Let's move on to the second test, the comparisons between the Soncause and the EX5. Both of these DACs use the ES9038 Q2M DAC. This is a lower-powered version of the 9038 and is not the same as the 9038 Pro that is used in the D90se. I was partly expecting a minor audible difference in presentation. After all, when I reviewed the Topping D30 Pro, I could hear a difference from that DAC compared to the alternatives I tested. But I said the differences between the D30 Pro and the competitors should probably be attributed to the different DAC versions and tuning. I expected the D90se to have some audible differences from the lower-powered 9038 Q2M DACs. Somewhat to my surprise, the D90se has absolutely no difference in sound signature compared to the Soncause. I went back and forth on my passive AB RCA switchbox. I listened over and over again to my test playlist and sought out music I had not heard before just to make sure my brain had something new to concentrate on. Timbre of instruments, placement of vocals, clarity, separation, none of this was different when conducting a true A/B test. And frankly, because both DACs were connected via RCA, outputting the same voltage, volume matching was not the issue. I changed the D90se's voltage, which is one of its key features. After volume matching, the voltage switch had no effect whatsoever on the sound signature and provided no difference in sound when compared to the LA QXD1. I repeated these tests with the DAC section of the EX5. There was an ever so slight difference in bass clarity. The D90se had a marginal amount greater clarity in the bass region. I only heard this differentiation with the HD800S. I could not hear any audible change when I used the LCD4 or Stelia or the S4X. There was no audible difference in the mids. Vocal presentation was exactly the same, as was placement, clarity, and timbre of instruments. Treble energy was the same on both the D90se and the EX5. However, the D90se had a bit more clarity and separation of instruments in the treble region. Again, this was a very minor difference, but you might be able to hear it depending on your music and sensitivity of your headphones. In short, the D90se does appear to have some audible differences when compared to the EX5. But to be honest, those differences can be so minute that you might struggle to hear the alterations in a true A/B test. For all practical purposes, these two DACs sound quite similar. Now, the final test. There aren't too many DACs with the ES9038 Pro, but I do happen to have one. It's the Sauvage D5. There was very little discernible variation. The bass seemed identical in clarity. There was no audible difference in bass impact, transients, or detail. The mids seemed to have a marginal difference. The D90se appeared to have slightly less emphasis in vocal sibilance compared to the D5. Clarity of multiple vocalists, various instruments, and minute details was identical, however. The treble presentation was, in my opinion, indistinguishable. There was the same amount of energy, clarity, and separation on both DACs. I repeated the test between the D90se and the D5 using all of my testing headphones. I used my desktop and laptop if for no other reason than for variation. I even changed the RCA inputs from time to time between the switch box. None of this made any audible difference to the ultimate result. Throughout these tests, I tried to voltage change on the D90se. I listened for any audible differences, particularly on my planar magnetic headphones. I don't think there's anything significant to hear just by switching from 4V to 5V on the D90se. Part of the problem is that in order to switch voltage, you need to essentially reboot the D90se into the root menu, and only then can you select voltage. But every time you do this, the DAC will disconnect from your source and you'll have to reconnect after reboot. So you can't really do an A/B test. I could not honestly tell you that I heard any material difference in the performance of my headphones by voltage switching. It's impossible to do an A/B test because of the way Topping implemented the feature. And because I could not hear an immediate, obvious difference after switching voltage, I'm not going to pretend that I did hear a difference. Ultimately, while I cannot say the D90se sounds identical in every single comparison, the differences I mentioned are so minor that it's a little surprising. From all the glowing reviews that the D90 has received, I would have thought this DAC would have immediate, consistent, audible differences, but it doesn't. The D90se has a neutral sound signature, hardly any different from the far cheaper alternative products. As for the far too often used excuse that a DAC is good because of its dynamics, I have only one comment. Do an actual A/B test using strict testing parameters, then explain in detail what you hear. I challenge every reviewer to buy a passive A/B switch and conduct thorough A/B tests before completing their reviews. That is the only way to verify what people think they hear and to determine the accuracy of their own beliefs. In my view, the D90se's multiple channel implementation does not seem to provide any material benefit in audio quality or resolution. I wish Topping had explained what we should be listening for so that I could have made a more specific test. Topping says you should pair the D90se with its matching amp. I see these types of claims all the time from Topping and SMSL. After all, they purposefully choose to create standalone products, then say you need to buy them as a set to get optimum performance. I have read comments from some who flat out refuse to consider an amp DAC pairing that is not specifically matched by the same manufacturer. While you're free to do what you want with your setup, it's a bit silly to propagate vague assertions that were initially started by the manufacturers. I have never seen any justification why you must pair a particular amp with a particular DAC. Of course, Topping in regards to the D90se says you should do just that. Why? They don't say. I asked my viewers if they thought it was important to buy a matching amp and DAC. I got various responses, but the majority believes it is not necessary. And those who did say that they would buy a matching set, apparently most of them would buy the combo only if there was some sort of synergy between the matched amplifier and DAC. In any event, I see no logical reason to buy the D90se with its matching amplifier. You may want to for your own personal reasons, but I'm not convinced. Consequently, feel free to use whatever amplifier you want. I have to keep reminding myself that the D90se costs $1,000. This DAC's usability doesn't come close to that price tag. Accessing the menu system on the D90se is not exactly user-friendly. Topping includes a remote with the D90se. I've already commented about the lackluster quality of this remote, but what's more perplexing is how this remote does not let you navigate the root menu of this DAC. You cannot access the D90se's menus through the remote, at least I haven't been able to. You cannot jump into those menus through the front panel buttons either. Instead, you have to switch the D90se off, hold down the select button on the front, and then at the same time switch the power on from the back. Only then do you jump into the root menu. Of course, this means that you cannot listen to music while you access the root menu system. It's in that root menu where you can select voltage, turn Bluetooth on or off, select filters, etc. Now, some of this stuff can be accessed with the remote, but not all, and especially not the voltage. I don't understand why Topping could not code a menu access button into the front panel or onto the remote. If you place your D90se up against a wall or on a rack with other equipment, you'll likely be less than pleased with this implementation. Now, let's briefly talk about Bluetooth and MQA. The D90se has all the major Bluetooth codecs of the far cheaper EX5. And, yet again, the Bluetooth implementation is reception only. You cannot send Bluetooth signal. I've complained about this limitation over and over again. If manufacturers are going to use Bluetooth in a DAC, then they should also have a transmission option. The fact that the D90se is no better in this regard than significantly cheaper alternatives, or frankly, more expensive ones, is something to seriously consider. The Bluetooth itself on the D90se is no different from any other Bluetooth implementation. You'll still have to consider the typical factors including range, obstacles, and codecs. Bluetooth is lossy signal. It's a convenience, and Topping did fine with it on the D90se. Frankly, I cannot hear a difference in sound signature between Bluetooth on the D90se when compared to wired connection on the D90se. There are, however, audible differences in clarity and separation when you compare the wired versus wireless input. Bluetooth on the D90se will not render true high-resolution audio. I strongly encourage people to research Bluetooth implementation. There are several articles online that clearly describe limitations with this feature. Bluetooth is good to have, but is clearly not a standout feature on the D90se. Finally, let's talk about MQA. The D90se has MQA. So do $100 DACs. The D90se is a fine DAC. I can't find any physical fault with it. The sound signature is neutral. It has robust features. If you already bought the D90se and are watching this video for reaffirmation that you made the right choice, you should probably stop watching right now. If you've made up your mind to buy the D90se and don't want a negative perspective, then move on. Go watch and read other reviews. I have given you fair warning. As I said, the D90se is a fine DAC with robust features and good build. But you can say that for many other products. The D90se may support higher audio resolutions such as DSD-1024 compared to alternative DACs, but let's be honest, how many tracks, albums, and artists do you find in this format? If your music collection is principally in higher resolution DSD, then maybe the D90se makes sense to you. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The D90se's DSD support up to 1024 is a feature that won't be fully realized until music is easily and largely available in this format, and I don't see the industry moving in that direction anytime soon. Also, it's not like the D90se will upscale to higher resolutions. Apart from this super high resolution DSD, there isn't much else about the D90se which separates it from a lot of other products. If you want Bluetooth reception, PCM support, balanced and single-ended output, then you can get all of that from the $350 Topic EX5. Except the EX5 has a powerful amplifier built in that the D90se doesn't. If you want neutral tuning, then you could buy the $250 Songcause LA-QXD1 or the Topic EX5 or the Sabaj D5 or the SMSL Sanskrit or the SMSL SU8 or SU9 or a lot of other products. When I look at the D90se and compare features, the vast majority of what this DAC offers is already available at lower price points. The two things that the D90se has that others don't are, first, multi-channel implementation of the 9038 Pro, and second, voltage switching. Maybe the selectable voltage is of some benefit to you. I think it's neat to have this option. If you really want some additional power from your amplifier, then I'm sure you could make use of the selectable voltage. But if your amplifier already provides sufficient power for your headphones or speakers, then you may not hear a noticeable difference in performance through the higher voltage. As far as the multi-channel use of the 9038, I'm not convinced. I've read discussions online where people wax poetic about what the multi-channels could potentially do. It's nice theorizing. What I would prefer is the manufacturer providing actual explanations of why they used multiple DACs, multiple channels, and what we should hear as a result. You could argue that this is innovation and only Topping or SMSL are doing it. Or you could see this as a way to inflate the price tag for questionable results. I don't know where I land on this issue yet. All I can say is that the multiple channels don't seem to make any audible difference, not in a true A/B test. All of this brings us to value. Look, if you're convinced you want to buy something, you will make every excuse to pay the price. Any arguments against your purchase will sound unreasonable to you in that circumstance. But honestly, I cannot recommend the D90se. For a nearly $1,000 DAC, this product needed to bring something more to the playing field. If it were cheaper, maybe I would have a different opinion. The problem I see is this: you can get equally good performance from DACs that cost 1/3 the price. No, you won't get every single technical feature of the D90se, but you'll get something that the D90se lacks: an amplifier. I mean, look at the EX5, or the SMSL M500, or the Sabaj D5. But maybe you're interested in all of the connection options of the D90se. I'd agree that aspect puts this DAC in a different position, but not necessarily a good one. For example, you could buy the Matrix Mini i3 or the Mini i Pro 3 for about the same amount of money as the D90se. Of course, with the Matrix products, you'll get similar connection options, MQA support, Bluetooth, PCM and DSD support, a robust build, and a powerful amplifier. Oh, and the Pro 3 has AirPlay and Roon compatibility in addition to Bluetooth. Or you could get the same connection options that the D90se has on the Gustard X16, but for almost $500 cheaper. If you're itching to spend $1,000 on a DAC and want something truly unique, then bypass Topping and SMSL altogether. Take a look at the RME80i2 DAC. Yeah, this product is expensive, but it's got a plethora of useful features that I simply cannot find at any other price. All of this brings us back to the following question: what exactly does the $1,000 D90se offer that is compelling? In my view, only two material things: the multi-channel use of the 9038 and selectable voltage. I don't think that the multi-channel feature is convincing, at least not on this product. And while I can see the benefit of the selectable voltage, I think it's not significant enough to warrant the D90se's price. I mean, I couldn't hear any immediate obvious difference by switching voltage. Since true A/B tests are impossible to conduct without a second D90se for comparison, I'm skeptical of anyone's claim that the voltage feature is a game changer. This is, frankly, frustrating. It is clear that Topping and SMSL are capable of making good products. Why do they keep releasing expensive gear that is largely a rehash of what came before? Why don't we have a dedicated desktop application, full Bluetooth support with reception and transmission, switchable EQ, and a built-in amplifier? Why are these features missing in a product that costs $1,000? And why do some people keep promoting this type of gear? Why can't we ask these manufacturers to give us something new, something innovative, effective, and useful? I searched online for explanations from other reviewers who looked at the D90se. I was hoping to find a rationale that I had missed, but I didn't see it. However, what I did find was a little bit disappointing. I found a statement by a particular reviewer that I think summarizes why Topping and SMSL seem to be stuck in the repeat cycle and why some people can't critically examine a product. Here's the quote. "The Topping D90se was a huge turning point for me, a real eye-opener, and I hope it would do the same for you. Always listen with your heart, with an open mind, and never with your wallet." I cannot get behind any argument that tells us to disregard our wallets from the decision-making process. It's our hard-earned money after all. I also cannot agree that listening to our hearts should come at the exception of our skepticism and critical thinking. If you feel like you can justify the D90se in your setup, more power to you. Go right ahead. But I won't recommend this DAC. It's too costly and does little that's materially different from the competition. You've got plenty of excellent options in the market, and I strongly urge you to think about them before buying the D90se.